Okay, so we are on the Malafamid Beis, where it says Omar Rav. So let me just recap quickly the point that we were learning here. We're talking about the Mishnah, where it said Hamechem Shepino. You have a hot kettle that was cleared, or actually there were two pshatim in this Mishnah. Either we're talking about a hot kettle that you took off the fire and you cleared it from all the hot water that's inside, or we're talking of a hot kettle that you took off the fire but it still has the hot water inside. And now this hot kettle, he wants to add cold water to it. So either we're talking about adding cold water to an empty hot kettle, which could warm up the water, or we're talking about adding cold water to a hot kettle that has water inside of it. So now the Gemara brings a machlokes of Rav and Shmuel about this subject. Omar Rav, so now Rav said, if you're filling a hot kettle that has been totally emptied from the hot water, Laishanu elo lahafshe. This that we learned that you could add cold water into this hot kettle is only lahafshe, if you're just warming this cold water. Aval etzaref aser. If you're doing it in order to be mitzaref the keli, as we learned last week, that what happens is when you heat up steel to a very, very hot point, and then you pour cold water into it, it strengthens the steel, which is a malacha of makeh bepatish. You're finishing it off, you're strengthening it. So if you're doing it for the purpose to strengthen it, then it's aser. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, afilu letzaref nami muter. An empty hot kettle that's boiling hot, and you pour cold water into it, letzaref, to strengthen it, is also permitted. Frag the Gemara, what does this mean? Letzaref lechatchila mishari. If he's doing it with that intention, he's pouring the cold water into it in order to strengthen it, that's mamash malacha. How would that be allowed? Ella, the Gemara says, I'itmer, hachi itmer. This is how we have to learn the machlokes of Rav and Shmuel, a bit differently. Omar Rav, Rav said, Lo yishanu ella shir lahafshe. If you're putting in enough cold water that it'll get warmed up, but you're not filling the cold water all the way to the rim, you're not filling it completely. Avol shir letzaref. If you're filling it completely, as Rashi explains, which only then will it strengthen the steel of this kettle, that's forbidden. Okay, so either way, we're not talking about a person that's having the kavanah to strengthen the steel of the kettle. But what Rav is saying is, if you put in enough that it could strengthen the steel of the kettle, it's not allowed. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Afila shir letzaref muter. If you're putting in cold water, enough all the way to the rim, and it could strengthen the steel of the kettle, it's allowed, because that's not your intention. Your intention is just to warm up the cold water. So as long as it's not your kavanah, it's fine. Says the Gemara, so lemeimre, shall we say that we see from here, the Shmuel ke Rab Shimon svirale, that Shmuel is following Rab Shimon's opinion, which is that as long, we had this already before a few times, Rab Shimon's opinion is that whenever you do anything that is a malacha, but you're not having kavanah for that malacha. The classic example is a person that's dragging the bench on the ground and it makes an indent, but you're not having kavanah for that. There's no malacha there at all. So over here as well, we see that Shmuel that says you can fill it to the rim, even though it's strengthening the kettle, it's not your kavanah and it's fine. So is this the case? Does Shmuel hold like Rab Shimon? Shmuel, but we know that Shmuel said another halacha. What happens if there is a hot, boiling hot, like a piece of fire of steel, of metal, that's in the middle of a Rosh Hashanah, and it's a danger for people that are walking there. So you're allowed to extinguish that on Shabbos. In order that people in the Rabbim should not become damaged from it. And the reason is because when you have fire burning in metal, there isn't really a fire there. It's just red, boiling hot, but there isn't really a fire. So extinguishing that fire is no malacha d'oraisa. It's only a ism d'rabbanan. So for the purpose that people shouldn't get hurt in the Rosh Hashanah, they allowed you to extinguish it. Avaloi gachelas shaleitz, but not if you have coals from wood that there's an actual fire there, so you're not allowed to extinguish it on Shabbos so that people shouldn't get hurt. Frek the Gemara. Now when you're extinguishing this coal, what is the purpose you're doing it for? You're only doing it that people shouldn't get hurt. Now this falls under the category of a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. You're not doing the malacha for the purpose of the malacha itself. What would be the purpose of the malacha itself when you're extinguishing a kol? The malacha of machabe. So we had this before already a few times in Perik Bameh Madlikin. If you're extinguishing a kol for the purpose to have that leftover coal to be used in the future for a fire, and that's the purpose you're doing it for, that's the purpose of the malacha. But in this case, when you're only doing it that people in the Rabbim, the Shus Rabbim, should not get hurt, it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Now, if he holds like Rab Shimon, afila shal eitz nami, even if it's a fire that's in a piece of wood and there's a real fire there, but it should also be allowed. Because over here it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, and for the purpose that people shouldn't get hurt in the Rishus Rabbim, it should be allowed. So now, let me stop for a second. The basis of the Gemara's question is, it's comparing two different things that Rab Shimon said. There's one leniency Rab Shimon says regarding Shabbos, adav she'ein miskaven. If you do a malacha and you have no intention for that malacha to happen, it's not a malacha. Now, the Gemara is saying there's another thing Rab Shimon said. When you did a malacha, you had kavanah to do it, but it's eina tzricha legufa. You don't need the malacha for the purpose and the sake for what the malacha is intended for. You're extinguishing the coal just that people shouldn't get hurt. There as well, Rab Shimon is lenient and says that it's not a malacha. So the Gemara is comparing the two. That if Shmuel holds like Rab Shimon by one, he should hold like Shmuel, but like Rab Shimon by the other. So that the Gemara answers, no, not necessarily. B'dava she'ein miskaven savala k'Rab Shimon. Regarding a davar she'ein miskaven, where the person is doing a malacha and he has no kavanah for the malacha at all, there he holds like Rab Shimon that it's permitted. The malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. However, when it comes to a malacha that a person has kavanah, but he's not doing it for the sake of what the malacha is coming to accomplish it, he's doing it for a side reason, like in this case, so that people shouldn't get hurt in the Rishus Rabbim, savalok Rab Yehuda, he holds like Rab Yehuda that it's forbidden. So this is a very fundamental Gemara that makes this distinction between a davar she'ein miskaven and a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. There's one place in the Sikha where the Rebbe discusses the shitta of Rab Shimon and Rab Yehuda here at length, and the Rebbe points out that we can see that there's a difference between a davar she'ein miskaven and a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa regarding other isurim in the Torah. When it comes to any other lav, any other isur in the Torah, this concept of a davar she'ein miskaven, that if you had no intention for the isur, then it's not asur, that applies to any other isur in the Torah. Same rule, just like by Shabbos, applies everywhere else. When it comes to the concept of malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, that you intended to do it, but not for its intended purpose, that heter only applies to Shabbos. It doesn't apply anywhere else. So the Rebbe says, because over there, you're having kavanah to do the action. You're just not having kavanah to do it for the purpose of the malacha. A davar she'ein miskaven, you're not interested in the malacha at all. That's a kind of heter that applies by all other isurim in the Torah. Okay, let's continue the Gemara. Amar Ravina says, Hilkach, therefore, kites b'Rishus Rabbim. If there is something that's dangerous for people walking the Rishus Rabbim, like a thorn, something that people are getting hurt from, so how do you get rid of it? You can't do a malacha d'oraisa to get rid of it, but what you do is, melichai pachis midal damas, you can take it away from there, just move it less than 4 amas at a time, which is the amount that is the malacha min atayra if it's 4 amas, so do it less than 4 amas at a time. Well, bekarmelis, and a karmelis where the isser of carrying 4 amas is only midrabanon, afilatuva. You can move it as far as you want, because that's a place where the carrying is only asim midrabanon, and therefore they will matter it for the purpose to get rid of a dangerous item. Okay, now the Gemara comes back to what it said in the Mishnah. In the second half of the Mishnah we learned, you can pour cold water into a hot kettle or into hot water for the purpose of just warming it up. If it doesn't become totally hot, you can do it just to warm it up. So the Gemara here is going to bring a braisa, which we'll discuss this at greater length, a machlekes of Beishamai and Beisilel. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a braisa. You may pour hot water into cold water. So, but not cold into hot. Divrei Beishamai, this is the opinion of Beishamai. So the explanation here of this idea, and this is a fundamental point that's relevant for this whole Gemara here, is that there's a concept called tato govar. Whatever is in the keli and below, and you're pouring into it, that is the more dominant force over here. If the water in the keli, which is in the bottom, is cold, and you pour into the cold, so then the cold is more powerful, and the hot water that you pour in gets diluted into it. If the water at the bottom is hot and you're pouring cold water into it, so then the cold water gets diluted. It goes into the hot water and it gets heated up quicker. Whatever is in the bottom is more dominant, has a more stronger koyach. So therefore, he says that you're allowed to pour hot into cold, but not cold into hot, because then you're going to be cooking the cold water. Beisil says, Ben you're allowed to pour both hot into cold and cold into hot. And Taisus and Rashi here explain, we're not talking over here about a keli rishain. If we'd be talking, if it's a keli rishain, that is the pot that was of water that was actually on the fire, even after it was taken off the fire, Beisil would agree that you can't pour cold into hot water. It's mamish cooking on Shabbos. But we're talking here about a keli sheini. And over here is the argument between Beishamai and Beisil, whether you're allowed to pour cold water into hot water. Okay, so the Gemara continues. So the Gemara says this heter regarding a keli sheini. This is part of the Brais actually. This heter of a keli sheini is only regarding a kais. When you have water in a cup designated to drink. When it comes to a bath, you could only pour, even according to Beisil, you could only pour hot into cold, and then the cold is more dominant and it's not going to get heated up. And you cannot pour cold into hot, because a bath, a person wants to keep much, much hotter to be able to use it for a bath than the water that he drinks in a cup, that he wants to have ready to drink right away, and he doesn't want to burn himself. So therefore the hot water in a bath, even in a keli sheini, is very, very hot, and you're not allowed to pour cold into hot. This Gemara is a very, very fundamental Gemara, because from here you see, this is one of the sources, we'll see soon more, but this is one of the sources to the concept that although we had already earlier in the Gemara, that generally speaking, there's this rule that keli sheini is not mevashel, it's not hot enough to be mevashel, but here we see that if it's a keli sheini that's made for a bath, so therefore it's designated to be very hot, and therefore it will be mevashel even in a keli sheini. And therefore, if you have water that's in a keli sheini and it's extremely hot, so then you have to be machmir with that, almost treat it like a keli rishain, as you see here in the Gemara, this concept. This is a lot of poskim bring this source over here.
Putting croutons in the soup.
One second. We're going to talk a lot about keli rishain and keli sheini today. We'll get to that in a minute. Now the Braisa continues and says, Rab Shimon ben Menashe oiser. Rab Shimon ben Menashe says that it's aser. Now, simply the pshat over here is, Rab Shimon ben Menashe says that either way, you're not allowed to ever put cold into hot, hot into cold. Right? Like Beis Hillel said that you're allowed. So Rab Shimon ben Menashe is coming to say that it's never allowed. Oyser. Even not like Beis Shammai said. Beis Shammai said that you're allowed to put chamel otech tzainen. Rab Shimon ben Menashe says you're not allowed to do anything. Okay, now the Gemara says, Omer Rav Nachman, halacha ke Rab Shimon ben Menashe. The halacha is like Rab Shimon ben Menashe. So Rav Yosef l'meimar. So now the Gemara says as follows. Rav Yosef thought to say, sefel, a wash basin. Okay, so now the question is, a wash basin, the water that's kept there, do people keep it so hot and therefore we should treat it like a bath? That even in a keli sheini, you shouldn't add cold water into it? Or should a wash basin be treated like a cup that a person prepares to drink? And a keli sheini in a cup is not that hot, and there we say you can pour cold water into it. So he said, Sefel arei kambati, a wash basin which a person uses usually to wash his hands or his face and so on. It's a hot water, mamish like a bath, and therefore you can't add any cold water to it. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said, Tani Rav Chia, Chia said, Sefel enekambati. A sefel, a wash basin, is not as hot. We don't treat it like a bath, and therefore you could pour cold water into it. According to what Rabbi Yosef was thinking in the beginning, the sefel arei kambati, that a hot water in a wash basin is like a bath, and there's no way you could ever dilute it with cold water. Now, we have a problem here, because Rav Nachman said, Halacha Rab Shimon ben Menashe. The halacha is like Rab Shimon ben Menashe, which was very machmer, and said that when it comes to the water that's in an ambati, you can't pour anything. You can't pour cold into hot. You can't pour hot into cold. You can't do anything. So now, if this wash basin is like an ambati, so you can't pour anything into it. You can't dilute it with cold water. If so, the question becomes, Elo b'Shabbos rechitza b'chamin leka. So on Shabbos you can't wash yourself with hot water. Rashi explains the Gemara's question is, back in those days, so what did they do? How did they have hot water? They had hot water in a pot, sitting on the fire, and then you would take that hot water from the pot, pour it out into a wash basin. Now that hot water you just poured out into a wash basin is still extremely hot. It just came from the fire. And if you want to use it to wash your face, wash your hands, you're going to have to dilute it with some cold water. Right? And that's the only way you can wash yourself. But according to what we're saying now, if we pass like Rav Shimon ben Menashe, there's no way you could dilute this hot water in the wash basin if it's like an ambati, if it's like a bath. So the question is, we learned earlier that on Shabbos a person can wash himself with hot water, his hands, his feet, his face. But according to what it comes out here, you can't wash with hot water because there's no way you could dilute it. And in boiling hot water, you won't be able to wash yourself with. So practically, how could you ever wash yourself? So the Gemara says, no. Mi savris, Rab Shimon ha-seifekoi. Do you think that when Rab Shimon said it's aser, Rab Shimon was referring to the seifer, and he said that you can't dilute it at all, not even if you're pouring the hot into the cold, you can't dilute it at all? No, that's not the case. Areisha koi. The words of Rab Shimon goes on the Reisha. Beis Hillel matirin bein chamen l'teich tzainin u bein tzainin l'teich hachamen. Beis Hillel said that if you want to dilute the hot, if you want to mix the hot and the cold, you can do it whether cold into hot or whether cold into hot. But Rab Shimon ben Menashe oiser tzayin l'toich chamen. All Rab Shimon ben Menashe was coming to say is that you can't pour cold into hot, but the hot into the cold you're allowed. So the Gemara immediately asks, if so, leimer Rab Shimon ben Menashe damake Beis Shammai. It's going to come out that Rab Shimon ben Menashe is saying the exact same thing as Beis Shammai. That was the opinion of Beis Shammai, that you could pour hot into cold, but not cold into hot. And for the Gemara, hachi ka'amar. This is what Rab Shimon ben Menashe meant to say. Lo nechleku Beis Shammai u Beis Hillel b'davar zeh. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not argue about this. According to Rab Shimon, there was no argument about this, and everybody holds that you could only pour cold into hot and not hot into cold. That's the pshat over here. But in a wash basin over there, Rab Shimon ben Menashe says that if you pour hot into cold, it's going to be allowed, and that's how you could cool off the water a little bit to be able to wash yourself on Shabbos. The Gemara concludes this inyan. Chazina leile Rave, Amar Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yeshua, Chazina leile Rave, I saw Rave, the loy kaped amona. He wasn't makpid when it came to hot water that was in a keli sheini, or in a wash basin, or in a cup. He would pour hot into cold, cold into hot. It didn't matter. Mit the Tani Rab Chia, since Rab Chia learned in Abraisa, Noisen Adam Kitten Shamayim L'Tech Seifel Shamayim, you can take a jug of cold water and place it into a wash basin, let's say, of hot water. Bein Chamen L'Tech Tzainin, Bein Tzainin L'Tech Chamen. Whether it's hot into cold or cold into hot. So over here, when you look at this Braisa, the way it's quoted originally, it doesn't seem like we're talking about pouring cold water into hot water. We're talking about taking like a flask of cold water and placing it inside the hot water, or a flask of hot water inside the cold water. So from here, the Gemara says, we learn out that it's not a problem to pour hot into cold or cold into hot. So the Gemara asks, maybe there it's different. It's not pouring. It's not talking about pouring. The muktzeh keli. Over there, you're taking cold water, which is in a keli, in a flask, and you're placing it into the hot water. No, we learned it's talking about maida, pouring. Even if you pour cold into hot or hot into cold in a keli sheini, it's not an issue. You can pour from cold water into a wash basin, whether hot into cold and cold into hot. And this is the halacha. When it comes to a keli sheini, you're allowed to pour hot into cold or cold into hot. When it comes to a keli rishon, you're not allowed to pour the cold water into the hot water, but you can pour hot water from a keli rishon that's off the fire into cold water. And so again, by a kli rishon, you can pour hot into cold because tator gova, the water on the bottom, is more dominant. But when it comes to a kli sheini, you can pour hot into cold, cold into hot. It doesn't make a difference. I just give you an example. A few weeks ago, when we were still in shul, so there was someone that was washing his hands, cold water, and the water was a little bit too cold for him, and his hands were chapped, and he didn't want to use the cold water. So he was taking water from a hot sheinik and pouring it into the cold water, into the kvart that he was using. So it's not a problem because he was taking water from a kli sheini, because once he took out the water from the sheinik, so it's water in a kli sheini, and pouring it into cold water. So it's saya kli sheini, and it's hot into cold. So it's definitely not a problem. Okay, just to give you one example. Zog the Mishnah. This next Mishnah continues on the same subject which we just discussed here, which is kli rishon and kli sheini. And here we're going to come to more details of kli rishon and kli sheini, and perhaps we'll discuss also some practical things about making a tea, coffee, and some other stuff. Zog the Mishnah, ha-ilfes, a frying pan, ha-kdeire, a pat, shehavira mirusachin. It was removed from the fire boiling hot, with boiling hot water in it. Okay, so this is a kli rishon. It's off the fire. Lo yiten l'toichet tavlin. You're not allowed to add any spices to it. Okay, so if you have a hot soup or any other hot, whatever it is that you removed from the fire, it's a kli rishon. So you can't add any tavlin because it's going to cook the spices. Avol, however, but if you poured out the contents of the kli rishon into a kli sheini, into a bowl or into a tureen, which is a larger serving bowl, so then there you're allowed to add the spices because once it's a kli sheini, the kli sheini is not mavashal and you could add it there. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Lakoil hu noisen." You're allowed to place the spices into everything, chutz midava sheyesh by chaymitz v'tzir, unless if the contents in the pot has in it vinegar or the from fish, the brine, fish brine. So that's sharper, that's stronger, and that will cook it. That will cook it quicker. Now, exactly what Rabbi Yehuda is referring to, a kli rishon or a kli sheini, the Gemara will discuss. We'll see in a moment. But first, let me just say, this is the Mishnah which tells us the halacha of kli sheini, that in kli rishon you can't place any spices because it's mavashal, and a kli sheini it's not mavashal, and therefore you can put spices into it. There's a very big machlekes rishonim regarding this Mishnah, which is brought la halacha and Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch brings 3 opinions about this Mishnah. The first opinion about this Mishnah is simple pshat, very straightforward. Kli rishon is mavashal, kli sheini is not mavashal, and therefore in a kli sheini you can put in whatever you want. Whatever you want, you can put, no issue, because it's not mavashal. When the Mishnah here says spices, it's just an example. When a person takes the pot off the fire and he tastes the food, it's not tasty enough, he wants to add some spices. But then you can put anything in a kli sheini, no problems. And that's this is all based on a Tosfos before in Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. Another pshat there Tosfos says, Tosfos proves that no, really, even with the kli sheini, even though it's not mavashal min atayre, but midrabanan, it's still an issue because it's nireh kimavashal. It looks like you're cooking. It's still pretty steaming hot, even in a kli sheini, and therefore it looks like you're cooking. And therefore, even in a kli sheini, you're not allowed to put anything because it looks like you're cooking. Besides something like tavlin, and the reason why tavlin is different is because tavlin, it's clear that you're not trying to cook it; you're just trying to add taste. But if you're adding anything else, so then you're trying to not necessarily add taste, so it looks like you're trying to take a cold item and heat it up and cook it, and therefore you're putting it in. Okay, that's the second opinion. Now there's a third opinion, which the Alter Rebbe quotes the Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe says that it's good to be machmer like this opinion, and that is that it's dafket tavlin, which is mefurish in the Mishnah, that it's not mavashal and kli sheini. Anything that falls into the category of a spices, that's not mavashal and kli sheini. Everything else, we have to be machmer that it could get cooked in kli sheini. And the reason is because anything else is something called kale habishal, things that get cooked much easier. There are certain things that need a stronger cooking and certain things that can get cooked much easier. And therefore, things that get cooked easier, even in a kli sheini, it's mavashal. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says to be machmer, anything else that even in a kli sheini, it can get cooked. Only tavlin and certain other things that are mafurish in the Mishnah or in the Gemara that they're not mavashal and keli sheini, they're not mavashal. Otherwise, anything else, we have to be machmer in a keli sheini that it's mavashal. And therefore, as this applies to coffee, to tea, to all these things, so today, most of croutons, whatever it is in a soup and all these things, most of Klal Yisrael, I believe, everybody basically, is machmer not to add any of these ingredients into a keli sheini, but only into a keli shlishi. Okay, so if you're making yourself a coffee, so you pour the water out of the urn, or whatever it is, so that's a keli sheini. Then from the keli sheini, you can pour the hot water into a third cup, or it's really a second cup. You can pour it into a second cup where you have already the coffee in there. Okay, we have the coffee there. And the same thing also with the tea. And the same thing also if you want to be able to add whatever it is to a soup, you want to add salt to the soup. That's, yes, salt as well.
Tavlin. That's tavlin.
No. We'll see in a moment in the Gemara regarding salt. That you should only do it in a keli shlishi, not in a keli sheini. Okay. Now, when it comes to what did you mention before? Croutons or lokshen, things like that. There's another issue of bishul acha bishul. But croutons, I'm not sure if how it's made. If it's bishul acha bishul, if it's bishul acha bishul, so then there's another reason to be matter, because there's no bishul acha bishul. Okay, let's go to the Gemara. Now the question was asked. First, the Gemara that starts with the Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Lakaylu noisen." You could add whatever you want, besides if it's vinegar or fish brine. What was he talking about? Rabbi Yehuda Reisha Kai? Is Rabbi Yehuda going on the Reisha Ulakula, and he's coming to be more makel? The Reisha said you can't add anything to a kli rishon because it's going to cook it. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you can add whatever you want to a kli rishon unless the kli rishon is made out of vinegar or fish brine, so that's sharper and it will cook it quicker. Or perhaps a seifa koi. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda goes on the seifa. Or l'chumra, and Rabbi Yehuda is coming to say l'chumra. The seifa said that in a keli sheini you could put anything. So Rabbi Yehuda says yes, you could put anything for a keli sheini besides if the contents of the keli sheini is vinegar or fish brine. That's sharper. Tashema, so the Gemara brings a braisa that clearly explains what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. The Tani Rabbi Yehuda kol ilfasin, in all frying pans, unoisin, you can add whatever you want, l'chol hakadeiros, reis chais unoisin, in all the boiling hot pots, you can add whatever you want, chutz midavar sheyesh boy chaymetz v'tzir. Besides, if it's a pot that has vinegar or fish brine. So over here you clearly see that Rabbi Yehuda came to be makel. He came to be more lenient. Now the Gemara turns b'chlal to this whole idea of adding something to a keli sheini. And the Gemara says as follows: Savar Rav Yosef lemeimar. Rav Yosef thought to say, Melach harehu ketavlin. Salt will have the same exact din like what the Mishnah said. The tavlin, the spices, right? What did it say? The bekli rishon b'sheila bashla. In a kli rishon, it'll get cooked. You can't add salt to a kli rishon. Bekli sheini loy bashla. In a kli sheini, you can add salt and it's not going to get cooked. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye said to Rav Yosef, but Tani Rab Chia. Rab Chia said in a brayse, melach enik tavlin. Salt is different than spices. The bekli sheini nami bashla. Even in a keli sheini, salt will get cooked quicker. So therefore, you should not add salt even into a keli sheini. Pliga Rav Nachman. So now this that Abaye brought from Rav Chia argues on what Rav Nachman said. Don't Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman said the opposite. Tzricha milcha bishula kebisra de tura. Salt, it doesn't get cooked so easily. In order for the salt to get cooked, it has to be cooked as strongly as the meat from an ox. It needs very strong cooking, so therefore it does not get cooked, even in a kli rishon l'chayda, yeah. Okay. The now the Gemara brings another version of this discussion here. So Rav Yosef lemeimar. Rav Yosef thought to say melach hareyu ketavlin. That salt is like the spices. The bekli rishon b'sheila or bekli sheini loy b'sheila. That in a kli rishon it will get cooked, and in a kli sheini it won't. Amalei Abaye, Tani Rab Chia, melach eina ketavlin. Salt is not like spices. The bekli rishon nami loy b'sheila. That in a kli rishon it will not get cooked, but in a kli sheini it will get cooked. V'hainu the Amar Rav Nachman, and this is what Rav Nachman said. Tzricha milcha bishula kebisra de tura, that it has to be cooked like bisra de tura, which means that in a kli rishon it will get cooked, and a kli sheini it won't get cooked. That's the conclusion of the Gemara over here.
Surely not in a kli.
Correct. Yes. So now the maskana of the Gemara over here is that salt salt has the halacha like tavlin. I mean, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch says that salt has the halacha like tavlin. That in a kli rishon it does get cooked, in a kli sheini it does not get cooked, and you could add salt. But the Alter Rebbe says to be machmer, and the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur also says to be machmer, not to add salt even to a kli sheini. Like I mentioned before, that Bechlal were very machmer regarding a kli sheini. There's the halacha that kli sheini ain't a mevashel, but still we are machmer not to add anything to a kli sheini, including salt.
Is a shaila if the ladle is kli sheini?
That's another shaila, correct. If you stick a ladle into soup and you're taking out the soup, so the question is whether whatever is in the ladle, is that considered to be a kli sheini or not?
So the ladle itself is the kli sheini. And so
correct, but when we're machmer that not to consider the ladle a kli sheini. Okay, so you have to pour it into a soup tureen, for example, and then from there into the bowls for the people to eat, in order to be able to add whatever you want to the soup. Okay, this ends this section of Perek Kira. The first section of Perek Kira discusses all the halachas that are connected to cooking, with the stove, with the oven, and the different things connected to that inyan. Now, from this Mishnah onward, the rest of the Perek, about another 5 blat, will discuss halachas of muktzeh. Okay, and there are various different types of muktzehs, as we'll see as we go along the way. I mean, the general concept of muktzeh, I'm sure you all know, is when something is set aside and is not prepared to be used on Shabbos, chazal or mesakin, that you shouldn't be allowed to touch them, you shouldn't be allowed to move them. Okay, so here we're going to talk about various different types of muktzehs. Let's see. So the Mishnah starts with the following din. Ein noisnen keli tachas haner l'kabel bayis hashemen. So what happens if you have a lamp, which an oil lamp, and there's oil that is dripping out of this lamp, and you want to place some kind of a dish under this lamp in order to catch that oil. So you're not allowed to take a keli to place under this lamp in order to catch this oil. If not, why not? What's the problem? So Rashi here brings, and this is from the Gemara, we'll see in the Gemara soon, a machlekes of Rabbe and of Yosef, what the issue is. One opinion is, the issue is, you have a keli, which is not muktzeh. You can use it for anything, to eat from it. You can use just a keli, you can be used. But even something that's a non-muktzeh item, you're not allowed to move it for the purpose of a muktzeh item. Over here, you're moving this non-muktzeh keli for the purpose to catch the oil from the lamp, which is muktzeh. That's an issue. That's one opinion in the Gemara. Another opinion of the Gemara is very interesting. It's this concept called mevatel kli mehechonai. If you have a keli that's prepared and accessible for use, and now you put it under this lamp to catch the oil, once it catches this oil, it becomes muktzeh. Now it becomes designated to this lamp, and it gets the oil in it, which makes it muktzeh. Once it makes it muktzeh, so now you can't use it anymore. So you just took a keli that was prepared and accessible to use, and you mevatl it, and you can't use it now. Now it becomes designated for this lamp. What's the issue with that? So the interesting thing is, Rashi over here says the issue is, it's similar to baina. It's like you're taking something and you're like sort of building it and connecting it, attaching it to the lamp. And now it becomes part of the lamp. In another place, and Taisus quotes this here, Rashi says the exact opposite. It's the malacha of seiser. You took a keli that was usable and you placed it under the lamp, and now you sort of broke it. Now it's not usable anymore. So therefore, that's the second shot of why you're not allowed to take this keli and place it under the lamp to catch the oil. If you placed it there by daytime, mutter, it's allowed. You can't have any hana from it, because it's not prepared from before Shabbos. Okay, so now let's see over here in the Gemara. We're going to see, as I mentioned, 2 opinions how to learn pshat in this Mishnah. And the Gemara is going to begin with a machlekes of Rabbi and of Yosef regarding a statement that Rav Chisda said. Amar Rav Chisda said, Afapi she'omru, although it was said that ein noisnen keli tachas tarnagoyles lekabel beitzasa, you're not allowed to place a bowl or any other dish under a tarnagoyles, a rooster or a hen, that is, to receive the egg. Okay, so what happens? Let's say you have a rooster that's going to lay an egg, a hen that's going to lay an egg, that is, and you're afraid that the egg is going to roll away. So you want to put something there that the egg should be laid in this dish, so it shouldn't roll away. So you're not allowed to do that. Aval koife aleha keli sheloi tishaver. But you are allowed to take a keli and cover an egg that was laid by a hen in order that the egg shouldn't break. Okay, so now this is, as Rashi explains, the same concept as our Mishnah. You're taking a keli that is usable, it's a non-muktzeh keli, and now you're placing an egg, which is muktzeh. An egg that's born on Shabbos is muktzeh. This is the concept of noilad. Something that was not there before Shabbos, and wasn't there before Shabbos, and it was laid on Shabbos. That's a new thing that was created on Shabbos, because it wasn't prepared when Shabbos came in, it's muktzeh. So now when the egg goes into this keli, it makes this keli not usable anymore. Okay? So therefore it's the same concept of our Mishnah, like we said, you're not allowed to put the keli to catch the oil that comes from the lamp. But you are allowed to use the keli to cover it. So the Gemara now will explain why. What's the reason why you're allowed to do this? Okay. Let's see the Gemara. Omar Rabbe, so Rabbe says, my time in the Rav Chisda, what's the reason of for Rav Chisda? Kasavar, because Rav Chisda holds, Tarnagoyles asuya lahatl beitzasa ba'ashpa. A tarnagoyles, a hen, when it places and when it lays an egg, where does it usually lay the egg? In a place, in a garbage, in some place where there's all kinds of garbage there. It's not usual for a hen to lay its egg in a place which is an incline and the egg could roll away. Okay? So it is usual for an egg to be found somewhere on the ground amongst garbage and so on, a place that people could step on it and crack the egg. But it's not usual for an egg to be placed in somewhere on an incline where you're afraid that the egg is going to roll down. Okay, so now, v'hatzala mitsuya hitiru. If it's protecting this egg from something which is common to happen, that the egg will get cracked, that Chachamim allowed. And therefore, they allow to take a bowl and cover the egg. Because covering the egg, that's something that's common. The egg, the hen lays the egg somewhere on the ground, somewhere in the garbage, and people could step all over it. That's very common. So for something that's commonly happens, Chachamim will makel and allow you to use the bowl to cover it. But to come and cover this, to have the hen lay the egg inside the bowl, sheini mitzuya, on an incline that it shouldn't roll away, lo yetiru. For an uncommon thing that could happen, since it's uncommon, for that Chachamim did not apply their leniency. So let me clarify again. Rabbi here is actually going according to the Pshat in our Mishnah, that the issue with moving this keli here is you're using a non-muktzeh item for a muktzeh purpose. So usually Chachamim don't allow to use a non-muktzeh item for a muktzeh thing. But here the Gemara says that from Rav Chisda we could understand that there is a leniency. If you're using a non-muktzeh item for a muktzeh purpose in order to save from a loss of money, from the egg to be cracked, or any other loss, as we'll see soon in the Gemara, many examples of different losses, and it's something that which could commonly happen, that Chachamim will make, you could move a non-muktzeh item for a muktzeh item. But if you're trying to move a non-muktzeh item for a muktzeh item which is not common, that's not allowed. So for example, going back to our Mishnah, when you had oil that was coming out of a lamp. Usually a lamp, there's no oil that's dripping out of a lamp. That's uncommon. So because in the Mishnah, the oil dripping out of the lamp is uncommon, there they did not allow to use a keli, which is non-muktzeh, for the purpose of the muktzeh of the lamp. Okay, this is Rabbi's statement. Now the Gemara says, Eisvei Abaye. Abaye asked him what Rabbi said, V'hatzala she'ena mitzuya lo hitiru. Is this the new klal that you're saying? They don't allow to move a non-muktzeh item for a muktzeh purpose if it's an uncommon thing that happened. They only allowed to do it if it's for a common purpose. But for Tanya, we learned in Abraisa, nishbere loy chavis shel tevel. What happens if a person had a barrel of tevel produce? Tevel produce is produce that meiser has not been taken from, and since meiser has not been taken from it, it's muktzeh. You can't eat it on Shabbos. You can't take meiser, and you can't eat it on Shabbos. So it's a muktzeh. It's a barrel of food that's all muktzeh. So what happens? So you have let's say a barrel of wine, and it's all muktzeh because meiser hasn't been taken from it yet, and he has this stored beroish gagai on his roof, and it broke. So now, could he save the wine? Could he bring another keli to save the wine? Maybe keli umaniach tachtao. You're allowed to bring a keli and place it under this barrel that broke in order to catch the wine in it. So what's the question of Abaya? This is something that seems to be an uncommon thing. It's an uncommon thing that a barrel should just break. So, and still we see, what does the Braisa say? You can use a non-muktzeh keli in order to catch the wine, for example, that's spilling out from this barrel that broke, which is muktzeh. So we see that you could move a non-muktzeh item for the purpose of a muktzeh item, even when it's something that's uncommon. So the Gemara answers no. That Braisa is speaking about a case which is common. V'gulfi chadeti. We're talking about a brand new barrel, the shchichi de poki. When it's used for the first time, so it's possible that it should burst and it should crack. And that's what happened over here. And therefore this is a case which is common, and therefore you're allowed to use the non-muktzeh keli for the purpose of this wine, for example, which was muktzeh. The Gemara will now bring another few questions. We'll go through them. And basically the Gemara is going to go through all the same idea, questioning this rule. You're not allowed to move a non-muktzeh item for the purpose of a muktzeh item, when something uncommon happened. Eisvei, we learned in another Braisa, noisten keli tachas haner, you're allowed to place a vessel under a lamp, lekabel netzaitzis, so that the sparks coming out of the lamp should go into the keli and not make a fire. So the Gemara assumes that sparks coming out of a lamp is uncommon. So how are you allowed to do that? You're using a non-muktzeh item for the purpose of a muktzeh item, for the lamp. And for the Gemara, nitzaitzis na mishchichi. The sparks coming out of a lamp is also common, and therefore that's allowed. Another case, eisvei kaifin kaira alaneir. You're allowed to cover with a bowl, for example. You're allowed to cover a lamp shlo b'kaira, so that the fire of the lamp should not go catch fire on the ceiling. So this seems to be very uncommon. Now the ceiling, which may catch some fire, is muktzeh. It's not a keli. It's part of the beams, the beams in the house, and it's all muktzeh. So you're using again a non-muktzeh kaira for the purpose of saving the muktzeh beams of the house. How are you allowed to do that if it's an uncommon thing that happens? Again, the Gemara answers no. We're talking about something that could commonly happen. We're talking over here about the bati gechini, with houses that have very low ceilings, the shchiach bud leika, that the fire that should catch on fire is common. Another thing, toshema, it says on the side of the Gemara, according to some opinions, they say toshema, v'chein kaira shenishbera, if you have beams in your house that broke, and you need to hold up the roof of your house, same chenoisa, you can support it besafsal, with a bench, baruch hasamita, or with the poles of a bed. So again, you're using a non-muktzeh item for the beams of your house, which are muktzeh. And this seems to be a very uncommon thing, that the beams of your house should break. And for the Gemara, no. Bikshuri chadete, we're talking about new beams that were just built. Davidi de Paki, it was just being built and it wasn't positioned properly in the beginning, and therefore it's possible, it's common that it should break. Another case, noisten keli tachas hadelef b'Shabbos, you're allowed to place a keli under a water leak. In a leak, you have a leak of water in your house, you're allowed to place a keli there to catch the water. So again, this is a case where you're using a non-muktzeh keli for the purpose of a water leak, and this is from the roof, coming from the roof, which is muktzeh, and it seems to be uncommon that you should have a leak in your house on Shabbos. And for the Gemara, bebati chadati, it's talking about a new house, the shchichi de dalfi. It is common that it wasn't yet insulated properly, and therefore it is common that it should begin leaking. Okay, we'll stop at this point. Then the Gemara is going to bring another interpretation to the Mishnah, another pshat to what Rav Chisda said, and then we'll see the continuation tomorrow in Mitzvah Shem. Hagut Tavach, B'suras Tevis, everybody.